Wikipedia describes Jeffrey Edward Epstein, 1953 until 2019, as an American financier first and as a convicted sex offender second. Citing for their first claim journalist Paul Lewis's article, dated January 4th, 2015, Jeffrey Epstein, The Rise and Fall of Teacher Turned Tycoon, in the British daily The Guardian, and for their latter claim, a press release. Jeffrey Epstein charged in Manhattan federal court with sex trafficking of minors by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, dated July 8, 2019. Wikipedia then goes on, quote, "He began his professional life as a teacher, but then switched to the banking and finance sector in various roles, working at Bear Stearns before forming his own firm. He developed an elite social circle and procured many women and children who were then sexually abused by Epstein and some of his contacts." End quote. The article continues, describing Epstein's criminal history, quote, "In 2005, police in Palm Beach, Florida, began investigating Epstein after a parent complained that he had sexually abused her 14-year-old daughter. Epstein pleaded guilty and was convicted in 2008 by a Florida state court of procuring a child for prostitution and of soliciting a prostitute. He served almost 13 months in custody, but with extensive work release. He was convicted of only these two crimes as part of a controversial plea deal. Federal officials had identified 36 girls, some as young as 14 years old, whom Epstein had allegedly sexually abused. Epstein was arrested again on July 6, 2019, on federal charges for the sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York. He died in his jail cell on August 10, 2019. The medical examiner ruled the death a suicide. Epstein's lawyers have disputed the ruling, and there has been significant public skepticism about the true cause of his death. Since his death precluded the possibility of pursuing criminal charges, a judge dismissed all criminal charges on August 29, 2019. End quote. Although Wikipedia bothers to mention that there has been significant public skepticism about the true cause of his death, it also states explicitly that his death precluded the possibility of pursuing criminal charges, and that because a judge dismissed all criminal charges on August 29, 2019, it therefore explicitly does not state that Epstein was guilty of the federal charge of sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York. So this is how history is supposed to remember the man exonerated of these crimes by means of supposed suicide. Born in 1953 to working-class Jewish parents in Brooklyn, New York City, Jeffrey Epstein's early childhood life was seemingly relatively uneventful. He exhibited aptitude for playing the piano from the age of 5 and managed to skip 2 grades in high school, but after attending 2 universities, one of these being the Quran Institute of Mathematical Sciences, which was considered among the most prestigious mathematics schools and mathematical sciences research centers in the world, in 2019. Epstein ultimately left his higher education without receiving a degree in June 1974 at age 21. In September 1974, Epstein began to teach at the exclusive, private Dalton School for Teens on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Despite his lack of credentials, Epstein began teaching physics and mathematics and allegedly showed inappropriate behavior towards underage students at this time. By, quote, influencing another Dalton parent into advocating for him at a parent-teacher conference, end quote, according to Lynn Copel, Greenberg's daughter, Epstein ingratiated himself to Alan Greenberg, then the chief executive officer of Bear Stearns, a New York-based global investment bank, securities trading, and brokerage firm that ultimately failed in 2008 as part of the global financial crisis and recession, and was subsequently sold to J.P. Morgan Chase. When Epstein was dismissed from Dalton after 2 years of poor performance, Greenberg offered Epstein a job as a low-level junior assistant to a floor trader at Bear Stearns in June 1976. According to Wikipedia, Epstein, quote, swiftly moved up to become an options trader, working in the special products division, and then advised the bank's wealthiest clients, such as Seagram president Edgar Bronfman, on tax mitigation strategies. In 1980, 4 years after joining Bear Stearns, Epstein became a limited partner. In 1981, he was asked to leave Bear Stearns for, according to his sworn testimony, being guilty of a Regulation D violation. Regulation D contains the rules providing exemptions from the securities registration requirements, allowing some companies to offer and sell their securities without having to register the securities with the U.S. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Wikipedia continues, quote, in August 1981, Epstein founded his own consulting firm, Intercontinental Assets Group Incorporated, IAG, which assisted clients in recovering stolen money from fraudulent brokers and lawyers. Epstein described his work at this time as being a high-level bounty hunter. He told friends that he worked sometimes as a consultant for governments and the very wealthy to recover embezzled funds, while at other times he worked for clients who had embezzled funds. Epstein also stated to some people at the time that he was an intelligence agent, and during the 1980s, Epstein possessed an Austrian passport that had his photo but a false name. The passport showed his place of residence in Saudi Arabia. During this period, one of Epstein's clients was the Saudi Arabian defense contractor Adnan Khashoggi, who was the middleman in transferring American weapons from Israel to Iran as part of the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s. In 1987, Epstein went to work as a corporate raider for Towers Financial Corporation. In business, a corporate raid is the process of buying a large stake in a corporation and then using shareholder voting rights to require the company to undertake novel measures designed to increase the share value, generally in opposition to the desires and practices of the corporation's current management. These measures might include replacing top executives, downsizing operations, or liquidating the company entirely. In 1987 and 88, Epstein was involved with unsuccessful bids to take over Pan American World Airways and Emory Air Freight Corp. and during this time he worked as a close consultant to TFC's Chief Executive Officer, President, and Chairman, Stephen Jude Hoffenberg. Towers Financial collapsed in 1993, and in 1995, Hoffenberg pleaded guilty to bilking investors out of $475 million. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, 18 of which he served, plus a $1 million fine and $463 million in additional restitution. At the time, the SEC considered his financial crimes to be, quote, one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, end quote. In court documents, Hoffenberg claimed that, quote, Epstein was intimately involved in the scheme. Epstein left the company by 1989, before it collapsed, and was never charged for being involved with the massive investor fraud committed. End quote. According to Wikipedia, quote, it is unknown if Epstein acquired any stolen funds from the Towers Ponzi scheme. In 1988, while Epstein was still consulting for Hoffenberg, he founded his own financial management firm, J. Epstein and Company. The only publicly known billionaire client of Epstein was Leslie Wexner, Chairman and CEO of L Brands, formerly The Limited Incorporated, and Victoria's Secret. In July 1991, Wexner granted Epstein full power of attorney over his affairs. The power of attorney allowed Epstein to hire people, sign checks, buy and sell properties, borrow money, and do anything else of a legally binding nature on Wexner's behalf. Epstein made millions in fees by managing Wexner's financial affairs. In 1996, Epstein changed the name of his firm to the Financial Trust Company and, for tax advantages, based it on the island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. By relocating to the U.S. Virgin Islands, Epstein was able to reduce federal income taxes by 90%. The U.S. Virgin Islands acted as an offshore tax haven while at the same time offering the advantages of being part of the United States banking system. End quote. From 2000 until 2007, Epstein was the president of the company Liquid Funding Limited. Again, according to Wikipedia, quote, the company was an early pioneer in expanding the kind of debt that could be accepted on repurchase, or the repo market, which involves a lender giving money to a borrower in exchange for securities that the borrower then agrees to buy back at an agreed upon later time and price. The innovation of liquid funding and other early companies was that instead of having stocks and bonds as the underlying securities, it had commercial mortgages and investment-grade residential mortgages bundled into complex securities as the underlying security. Liquid funding was initially 40% owned by Bear Stearns. Through the help of the credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Fitch Ratings, and Moody's Investors Service, the new bundled securities were able to be created for companies so that they got a gold-plated AAA rating. The implosion of such complex securities, because of their inaccurate ratings, led to the collapse of Bear Stearns in March 2008 and set in motion the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 and the subsequent Great Recession. In August 2006, Epstein invested $57 million in the Bear Stearns high-grade structured credit strategies enhanced leverage hedge fund. This fund was highly leveraged in mortgage-backed collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. On April 18, 2007, an investor in the fund, who had $57 million invested, discussed redeeming his investment. At this time, the fund had a leverage ratio of 17 to 1, which meant for every dollar invested, there were $17 of borrowed funds. Therefore, the redemption of this investment would have been equivalent to removing $1 billion from the thinly traded CDO market. The selling of CDO assets to meet the redemptions that month began a repricing process and general freeze in the CDO market. The repricing of the CDO assets caused the collapse of the fund 3 months later in July, and the eventual collapse of Bear Stearns in March 2008. End quote. According to an article in The Daily Beast from July 24, 2019, Epstein, quote, visited the White House while Bill Clinton was president on at least 4 occasions. End quote. Clinton himself lauded Epstein as, quote, a committed philanthropist with insights and generosity, end quote. At that time, Epstein was on the board of Rockefeller University, a member of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations, and was a major donor to Harvard University. Epstein was a longtime acquaintance of Prince Andrew and attended parties with many prominent people, including Bill Clinton, George Stephanopoulos, Donald Trump, Katie Couric, Woody Allen, Harvey Weinstein, Steven Pinker, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Steve Bannon, and Lawrence Krauss. His contacts included Rupert Murdoch, Michael Bloomberg, Richard Branson, Michael Jackson, Alec Baldwin, the Kennedys, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He also worked with Bill Gates. It was reported in 2019 that Epstein had planned to seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating up to 20 women at a time, using his New Mexico compound as a baby ranch, where mothers would give birth to his offspring. Epstein installed concealed cameras in numerous places on his properties to allegedly record sexual activity with underage girls by prominent people for criminal purposes, such as blackmail. According to Wikipedia, he allegedly lent girls to powerful people to ingratiate himself with them, and also to gain possible blackmail information. According to the Department of Justice, he kept compact discs locked in his safe in his New York mansion with handwritten labels that included the description "Young, name, plus name." Epstein implied that he had blackmail material when he told a New York Times reporter in 2018, off the record, that he had dirt on powerful people, including information about their sexual proclivities and recreational drug use. End quote. According to Wikipedia, quote, in March 2005, a woman contacted Florida's Palm Beach Police Department and alleged that her 14-year-old stepdaughter had been taken to Epstein's mansion by an older girl. There, she was allegedly paid $300 to strip and massage Epstein. a former employee told the police that Epstein would receive massages 3 times a day. Eventually, the FBI compiled reports on 34 confirmed minors eligible for restitution, increased to 40 in the NPA, whose allegations of sexual abuse by Epstein included corroborating details. Julie Brown's 2018 exposés in the Miami Herald identified about 80 victims and located about 60 of them. Details from the investigation included allegations that 12-year-old triplets were flown in from France for Epstein's birthday and flown back the following day after being sexually abused by the financier. It was alleged that young girls were recruited from Brazil and other South American countries, former Soviet countries, and Europe, and that Jean-Luc Brunel's MC2 modeling agency was also supplying girls to Epstein. In July 2006, the FBI began its own investigation of Epstein, nicknamed Operation Leap Year, which resulted in a 53-page indictment in June 2007. However, Alexander Acosta, then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, agreed to a plea deal, which Alan Dershowitz helped to negotiate, a so-called sweetheart deal, to grant immunity from all federal criminal charges to Epstein, along with 4 named co-conspirators and any unnamed potential co-conspirators. According to the Miami Herald's Julie K. Brown, reporting on November 28, 2018, the non-prosecution agreement, quote, essentially shut down an ongoing FBI probe into whether there were more victims and other powerful people who took part in Epstein's sex crimes, end quote. At the time, this halted the investigation and sealed the indictment. Acosta later said that he offered a lenient plea deal because he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence, was above his pay grade, and to leave it alone. Following Epstein's arrest in July 2019 on sex trafficking charges, Acosta resigned as Secretary of Labor, effective July 19, 2019. Epstein agreed to plead guilty in Florida State Court to 2 felony prostitution charges, register as a sex offender, and pay restitution to 36 victims identified by the FBI. On June 30, 2008, after Epstein pleaded guilty to a state charge, 1 of 2, of procuring for prostitution a girl below age 18, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Epstein's cell door was left unlocked. He had access to the attorney room, where a television was installed for him, before he was moved to the stockade's previously unstaffed infirmary. He worked at the office of a foundation he had created shortly before reporting to jail. He dissolved it after he had served his time. Epstein served almost 13 months in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade before being released on July 22, 2009, for a year of probation on house arrest until August 2010. While on probation, he was allowed numerous trips on his corporate jet to his residences in Manhattan and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Though Epstein had been a Level 3 registered sex offender in New York since 2010, the New York Police Department never enforced the regulation to check in with the New York Police Department every 90 days, though non-compliance is a felony. On July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested by the FBI NYPD Crimes Against Children Task Force at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey on sex trafficking charges. On July 8th, prosecutors with the Public Corruption Unit of the Southern District of New York charged him with sex trafficking and conspiracy to traffic minors for sex. The grand jury indictment alleges that dozens of underage girls were brought into Epstein's mansions for sexual encounters. Epstein requested to be released on bond, offering to post $100 million with the condition that he would also submit to house arrest in his New York City mansion. On July 23rd, Epstein was found injured and semi-conscious at 1:30 a.m. on the floor of his cell, with marks around his neck that were suspected to be the result of either a suicide attempt or an assault. His cellmate, former New York City police officer Nicholas Tartaglione, who is charged with 4 counts of murder, was questioned after Epstein's condition. He denied having any knowledge of what happened. Epstein himself said he recollected nothing. Epstein believed that he was attacked by his cellmate, who was awaiting trial for 4 counts of murder, while the correctional staff suspected attempted suicide. On August 9, 2019, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out, but no one took his place. Later in the evening, contrary to the jail's normal procedure, Epstein was not checked every 30 minutes. The 2 guards who were assigned to check his jail unit that night fell asleep and did not check on him for about 3 hours. The guards falsified related records. 2 cameras in front of Epstein's cell also malfunctioned that night. Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in New York City at 6:30 a.m. EDT on August 10, 2019. On November 19, 2019, federal prosecutors in New York charged Metropolitan Correctional Center guards Michael Thomas and Tova Noel with creating false records and with conspiracy after video footage obtained by prosecutors revealed that Epstein had, against regulation, been in his cell unchecked for 8 hours prior to being found dead. On August 10, 2019, the Bureau of Prisons and U.S. Attorney General William Barr called the death an apparent suicide, although no final determination had been made. On August 16, 2019, Barbara Sampson, the New York City medical examiner, ruled Epstein's death a suicide by hanging. The medical examiner, according to Epstein's defense counsel, only saw 9 minutes of footage from one security camera to help her arrive at her conclusion. The circumstances leading up to his death are being investigated by the Justice Department.